The crack of Nate Valderon's whip split the desert air like thunder as he charged his stallion toward the slave cart, his weathered face twisted with fury. The iron chains binding the 12 captives rattled violently as the wagon bounced over rocks, but it was the defiant flash in one woman's dark eyes that made his blood boil with righteous anger. "Release them, Corbin." Nate roared at the slave trader, his Colt .45 gleaming in the scorching Arizona sun. Dust kicked up from his horse's hooves as he closed the distance between them. Corbin Blackthorne, vile man with gold teeth and scars mapping his brutal history, sneered from the driver's seat. "This ain't your business, cowboy. These are bound for the silver mines in Perdition Creek." Maria Esperanza lifted her chained hands, wiping blood from her split lip where Blackthorne had struck her for singing freedom songs to comfort the other captives. Her raven hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and despite the dirt and exhaustion etched on her bronze skin, her spirit burned fierce as wildfire. "Everything involving human bondage is my business," Nate snarled, spurring his horse harder. The magnificent beast, a pure black stallion named Thunder, responded with explosive power. Blackthorne's hand moved toward his rifle, but Nate was faster. His whip snaked out, wrapping around the slave trader's wrist with bone-cracking precision. Blackthorne screamed as he was yanked from the wagon, his body hitting the rocky ground with a sickening thud. The wagon's momentum carried it forward, its team of mules panicking without a driver. Maria grabbed the reins with her manacled hands, her knuckles white as she fought to control the frightened animals. Behind her, the other captives, men, women, children cried out in terror as the wagon swayed dangerously. Nate leaped from Thunder's back onto the moving wagon, his boots landing with practiced precision on the wooden seat. His strong hands closed over Maria's, their skin touching for the first time, as together they pulled the mules to a halt. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough with concern as he studied her face, taking in every scratch, every bruise inflicted by her captors. "I will survive," Maria replied in accented English, her voice melodic despite her exhaustion. "But the others, some are badly injured." Their eyes met and held, an electric current passing between them that had nothing to do with the desert. Nate felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than physical attraction. This woman possessed a strength that matched his own fierce independence. "Stand back," he commanded gently, producing a set of lockpicks from his vest pocket. His deft fingers worked at her shackles, years of cowboy ingenuity making quick work of the crude iron bonds. As the chains fell away, Maria rubbed her raw wrists, never taking her gaze from Nate's rugged face. He was perhaps 30, with sun-bleached hair and eyes the color of winter sky. Scars on his hands spoke of hard labor. In harder fights, but his touch had been surprisingly gentle. "What is your name, brave one?" she asked softly. "Nate Valderon, and yours?" "Maria Esperanza." She tested her name on her tongue like a prayer of freedom. "It means hope." Behind them, Blackthorne was struggling to his feet, blood streaming from his nose. "You'll pay for this, Valderon. The Crimson Cartel doesn't forget." Nate's expression hardened as he freed the other captives with swift efficiency. "Neither do I, Blackthorne. Neither do I." As the last chains fell away, Maria placed her hand on Nate's arm. The simple touch sent fire racing through his veins, and he knew his life had just changed forever. "We must go quickly," she whispered. "More of his men will come." Nate nodded, already calculating their escape route to safety. But as he helped Maria onto Thunder's broad back, her body pressed close against his. He realized the greatest danger might not be the pursuing slavers, it might be the wild. Passion igniting between them like a prairie fire, Thunder's hooves pounded across the desert floor as Nate and Maria rode hard toward the distant mountains. The other freed captives following on stolen mules from Blackthorne's wagon. The sun was climbing toward its merciless peak. But the heat building between the cowboy and the woman pressed against his back had nothing to do with the weather. "There's a hidden canyon about 5 miles north," Nate called over his shoulder, his voice strained with the effort of concentrating on navigation instead of the way Maria's arms encircled his waist. "We can rest there and plan our next move." Maria's breath was warm against his neck as she leaned closer to be heard over the thundering hooves. The others need medical attention. The old man Cornelius has been beaten badly. Nate's jaw clenched. Every mile they put between themselves and Blackthorn's crew was precious. But he couldn't ignore the suffering of innocent people. I know. A place, an old mission ruins, where a healer named Paloma lives. She asks no questions. The canyon entrance was concealed behind a curtain of hanging vines and weathered rock formations. As they rode into the cool shadows, Maria marveled at the hidden oasis a crystal stream wound through the canyon floor. An ancient cottonwoods provided blessed shade. Nate dismounted first, then reached up to help Maria down. The moment his hand spanned her waist, time seemed suspended. She slid slowly down his body, her curves molding against his muscled frame until her boots touched the ground. Neither moved away. "You saved my life," she whispered, her dark eyes searching his face. Any decent man would have done the same. But even as he said it, Nate knew it wasn't true. Most men would have ridden past, unwilling to risk their necks for strangers. "Ah, Maria," said firmly, her palm resting over his heart. "You are not any man, Nate Valderon." Before he could respond, shouts from the other freed captives broke the spell. Cornelius, an elderly farmer who'd been captured trying to protect his granddaughter, had collapsed from his injuries. Nate immediately took charge, his natural leadership emerging as he organized the group. While he tended to Cornelius, Maria gathered the women and children, speaking to them in rapid Spanish, offering comfort and organizing their few possessions. Watching her move among the people with grace and compassion, Nate felt his admiration deepen. She wasn't just beautiful, she was a natural leader, someone who understood that true strength meant protecting those weaker than yourself. "You were not born to slavery," he observed quietly when they had a moment alone. "You're bearing your education, ... Who are you really, Maria Esperanza?" Shadow crossed her features. "I was the daughter of a wealthy rancher in Sonora. My father owned thousands of acres, hundreds of cattle." Her voice grew bitter, till the Crimson Cartel decided. "They wanted his land, murdered my family, and burned our hacienda. I was ... I was to be sold to pay their gambling debts." Rage flared in Nate's chest, white-hot and consuming. "The cartel will answer for what they've done. You cannot fight them alone," Maria said, her hand catching his. "They have men in every town, judges and sheriffs in their pockets. They are like a cancer spreading across the territory." "Then we'll cut out the cancer," Nate replied, with deadly quiet determination. "But first we get these people to safety." As if summoned by their conversation, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed. Off the canyon walls, Nate drew his Colt, his body immediately positioning itself between Maria and the canyon entrance. "How many men does Blackthorn usually travel with?" he asked tersely. "Too many," Maria breathed, fear flickering in her eyes for the first time. "At least a dozen, and they know this country as well as you do." The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by voices and the jingle of spurs. Nate's mind raced, calculating odds and escape routes. They were trapped in the canyon with injured people. Who couldn't ride hard? "Stay close to me," he commanded, cocking his pistol. "Whatever happens, Maria, stay close." She nodded, drawing a small knife from her boot. "I will not be taken alive again, Nate. I would rather die fighting beside you." The words hit him like a physical blow, and Nate realized, with startling clarity, that he'd rather die fighting beside her too, Valderon. "We know you're in there." Blackthorn's voice echoed off the canyon walls like a death knell. "Send out the girl, and we might let the rest of you live." Nate peered around the boulder where he'd positioned the group, counting muzzle flashes. 12 men, just as Maria had predicted, spread across the canyon entrance with military precision. Behind him, the freed captives huddled together, the children's whimpers muffled by their mothers' trembling hands. "Over my dead body," Nate called back, his voice carrying the promise of violence. Blackthorn's laugh was like gravel in a windstorm. "It can be arranged, cowboy." Bullets began pinging off the rocks around them. Nate returned fire methodically, each shot calculated to conserve ammunition while keeping the slavers pinned down. But he knew the mathematics of their situation. 12 guns against one. With limited cover and no escape route, Maria crouched beside him, her knife glinting in her hand. "There is another way out," she whispered urgently. "Behind the waterfall. I saw it when we arrived." "Too narrow," Nate replied, squeezing off another shot. "We'd have to go single file and they'd pick us off, not if someone created a distraction." Maria's dark eyes met his, and Nate saw the terrible determination there. "No." His voice was flat, final. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself." "You cannot stop me, Vaquero," she said softly, using the Spanish word for cowboy with an affection. That made his heart clench. These people have children. They deserve a chance at freedom. Before Nate could grab her, Maria had rolled away from their position. As she stood suddenly, her hands raised, walking toward the canyon entrance with regal composure. "I am Maria Esperanza," she called out, her voice carrying clearly. "Daughter of Don Roberto Esperanza of Sonora. I surrender myself to you." "Maria, no." Nate roared, but gunfire forced him back behind cover. Blackthorn's men ceased shooting, clearly intrigued by this development. "Well, well," the slave trader's voice carried a note of greed. "The Esperanza heiress. Boys, we just struck gold. The cartel's been looking for her specifically." "Let the others go," Maria demanded, still walking forward with measured steps. "Your quarrel is with my family, not these innocent people." Nate watched in agonized admiration as she continued her deadly gambit. Every step took her further from safety, but it also drew the slaver's attention away from the waterfall passage. Already he could see Cornelius helping the other captives toward the hidden route, but Nate couldn't let her walk into certain death. Not when he'd finally found a woman who matched his own fierce spirit, making a decision that went against every tactical instinct he possessed. Nate holstered his gun and stepped out from behind the rocks. "If you want her," he called out, his hands raised but ready to draw, "you'll have to go through me first." The canyon fell silent except for the splash of the waterfall. Blackthorn emerged from behind his own cover, flanked by two of his deadliest men, the Kozlov brothers, Russian immigrants with reputations for cruelty that made even hardened criminals nervous. "How romantic," Blackthorn sneered. "The cowboy wants to play hero." "This is between you and me, Blackthorn," Nate said steadily. "Let's settle it like men. Single combat." "Nate, don't," Maria started to protest. "I've got a better idea." Blackthorn interrupted, drawing his pistol. "We'll just shoot you both and be done with it." But as his finger tightened on the trigger, chaos erupted from an unexpected direction. The thunder of hoofbeats filled the canyon as riders poured through a hidden side passage. Apache warriors led by a man Nate recognized with profound relief, Ayana. Nate shouted to the Apache war chief, who had once been his friend during his years living with the tribe. The chief's painted face was grim as he took in the scene. "Nate Valderon," he called in accented English. "You bring trouble to sacred places." "These men traffic in human slavery," Nate replied, knowing that would carry weight with the Apache leader. "They defile the canyon with their presence." Expression darkened further as he surveyed Blackthorn's gang. The Apache had their own bitter history with slavers who preyed on their people. "Leave now," the chief commanded, his voice carrying the authority of generations, "or stay forever." The message was clearly, alive or die, where they stood. Blackthorn's face went pale beneath his stubble as a dozen Apache warriors surrounded his men, their weapons drawn and faces painted for war. The slave trader had dealt with many dangerous men in his brutal career, but the cold efficiency of these warriors promised death without ceremony or hesitation. "This ain't over, Valderon," Blackthorn snarled, backing toward his horse. "The cartel has a long memory." "So do I," Nate replied quietly, his hand resting on his gun butt. The slavers retreated with the haste of men who recognized superior force, their hoofbeats fading into the desert heat. As silence returned to the canyon, Chief Ayana dismounted and approached Nate with the fluid grace of a predator. "3 summers you lived among us," the Apache leader said, clasping Nate's forearm in the traditional greeting. "You learned our ways, spoke our tongue. Why do you ride alone now, brother?" "Some paths must be walked alone," Nate replied. In fluent Apache, then switched back to English as Maria approached. But sometimes fate brings unexpected companions. Ayana's keen eyes studied Maria with the perception of a man who had survived decades of frontier warfare. This woman carries pain in her heart, but also great strength. She is worthy of protection. She is worthy of much more than protection, Nate said softly, his gaze finding Maria's. The freed captives had emerged from their hiding place behind the waterfall, their faces reflecting amazement at their salvation. Cornelius, though still weak, insisted on thanking both Nate and Chief Ayana personally. "My granddaughter and I owe you our lives," the old farmer said, his voice thick with emotion. "No man should be another's property," Ayana replied simply. "This is the way of all free peoples." As the day wore on, the Apache warriors shared food and medicine with the rescued captives. During this respite, Nate found himself drawn repeatedly to Maria's side, their conversations revealing layers of compatibility that went beyond mere physical attraction. "You speak Apache," she observed as they sat by the stream, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. "I lived with Ayana's band for 3 years after my family was killed by raiders," Nate explained, his voice distant with memory. "They taught me that survival sometimes means becoming something different than what you were born to be." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "The cartel killed my family because we refused to sell them our land. I understand the desire for vengeance, but I have learned that hatred consumes the one who carries it." "Then what drives you now?" Nate asked, genuinely curious about this remarkable woman who had faced slavery with such dignity. "Hope," she said simply, echoing her surname. "Hope that there are still good men in this world who will stand against evil. Hope that love can triumph over cruelty." Her dark eyes met his. "You have given me reason to believe in hope again." Nate Valderon. The intensity of her words, the way she spoke his name like a prayer, shattered the last of his emotional defenses. Without conscious thought, Nate reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Maria," he whispered, and then his lips found hers. The kiss was everything he hadn't known. He was searching for, tender yet passionate, gentle yet fierce. She melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as if she could anchor herself. To his strength, when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The world seemed different somehow, charged with new possibilities. "I have to warn you," Nate said roughly, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm not an easy man to love. I've got blood on my hands and enemies who won't hesitate to hurt anyone close to me. And I am a woman whose family was murdered for their land," Maria replied, her voice steady, despite the emotion in her eyes. "I have nothing to offer but a heart that refuses to surrender to despair." "That's everything I need," Nate said, pulling her close again. From across the campfire, Chief Ayana watched the couple with knowing eyes. Some bonds were forged by shared danger, but this one ran deeper. Two souls, recognizing their perfect match in a world that offered few such gifts. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, but tonight love had taken root in the most unlikely of places. Dawn broke over the canyon with the promise of scorching heat. But Maria woke in Nate's protective embrace, feeling safer than she had since her family's murder. Their bedroll was positioned slightly apart from the others, offering a semblance of privacy in their temporary sanctuary. "We can't stay here," Nate murmured against her hair, his arms tightening around her as consciousness fully returned. "The Apache have their own troubles without harboring refugees." Maria nodded, though. Every instinct screamed at her to remain in this haven where she could pretend the outside world didn't exist. "Where can we take the others?" "They need time to heal. It's a settlement called Haven's Rest, about 3 days' ride north. It's run by a woman named Catalina Montoya Tuff, is nails, and doesn't ask questions about people's past. You know?" "Many such places," Maria observed, studying his weathered face in the growing light. "A man makes enemies in this life. He'd better know where his friends are," Nate replied grimly. "The cartel won't stop hunting us, Maria. Blackthorn was just the beginning." As if summoned by his words, Chief Ayana approached their position with urgent news. "Riders coming from the east," he reported. 20 men, maybe more. They wear the red bandanas of the cartel." Nate was on his feet instantly, his hand finding his gun. How long do we have? 1 hour, perhaps less. The camp erupted into organized chaos as the freed captives prepared for another flight. Cornelius collapsed when he tried to mount a horse, his injuries too severe for hard riding. "Leave me," the old man gasped. "Out. I won't be the reason children die." "No one gets left behind," Nate declared with finality. Turned to Ayanna. "Is there another way out of this canyon? The old mining tunnels?" the chief replied. "But they are dangerous cave-ins, bad air." And they emerged near Perdition Creek. "In cartel territory, sometimes you have to go through hell to reach paradise," Nate muttered, then raised his voice. "Everyone gather your things. We're going underground." The entrance to the abandoned silver mine was concealed behind a rockfall, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. As they prepared to descend into darkness, Maria caught Nate's arm. "Let me go first with a torch," she suggested. "I know these old mines. My father owned several before the cartel destroyed our holdings. Too dangerous," Nate protested. "Everything we do now is dangerous," Maria replied with a sad smile. "But I know what to look for. Gas pockets, unstable support beams. Trust me, my love." The endearment hit Nate like a physical blow, confirming what his heart had been whispering since the moment he first saw her defiant spirit. He was in love with Maria Esperanza, completely and irrevocably. "Stay close," he commanded, unable to say the words he longed to speak. "If anything happens to you..." ... Double quotes, she silenced him with a quick, fierce kiss. "Nothing will happen. We have too much to live for now." One by one, the group descended into the mine's stifling darkness. The tunnels were a nightmare maze of collapsed passages and treacherous drops. But Maria navigated with the confidence of inherited knowledge, her torch casting dancing shadows on the rock walls. Behind them, echoing through the canyon, came the sound of arriving horses and shouting voices. The cartel had found their hiding place, but they were too late. Their quarry had vanished into the earth itself. "The tunnels branch ahead," Maria called softly, her voice muffled by the oppressive stone walls. "The left passage leads to an underground river. The right emerges near the old smelter outside Perdition Creek." "Which is safer?" asked Jenny, one of the rescued women, cradling her infant son. Maria and Nate exchanged grim looks. Neither path promised easy passage, but the smelter route would bring them closer to cartel stronghold and the heart of enemy territory. "We take the river," Nate decided. "Water means we can travel by night, and it'll hide our trail." As they pressed deeper into the mine's bowels, leaving the desert sun far behind, none of them knew that their greatest test still lay ahead, that their love would soon be forged in the fires of mortal peril. The underground river roared through, the cavern like a living thing, its black waters reflecting their torchlight in dancing patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. The sound was deafening after hours of creeping through silent stone passages, and the spray that filled the air carried the promise of both salvation and doom. The current's strong, Nate shouted over the rushing water, testing the depth with a broken timber. "But there's a natural channel that should carry us downstream, away from cartel territory." Maria studied the makeshift raft they'd constructed from mine timbers and ropes salvaged from abandoned equipment. It looked frighteningly fragile for carrying 13 people, including children and the injured Cornelius. "My grandfather used to tell stories of these underground rivers," she called back. "They connect to cave systems that stretch for hundreds of miles. Some say they emerge in sacred Apache springs far from here." Jenny clutched her baby tighter as she looked at the churning water. "What if we drown down here?" "No one would ever find our bodies. Better to die free than live in chains," declared Pavel, a Russian immigrant who'd been captured while prospecting. His words carried the weight of a man who'd already lost everything once. Nate helped the elderly Cornelius onto the raft, noting how the man's breathing had grown more labored. Time was running against them. The old farmer needed medical attention soon, or their rescue would become meaningless. "I'll guide from the front," Nate announced, positioning himself at the raft's bow with a makeshift pole. "Maria, you take the rear. Everyone else, stay low and hold tight." As they pushed off into the river's embrace, the current immediately seized control. The raft spun wildly for terrifying moments before Nate managed to angle them into the main channel. Cold water splashed over the timbers, soaking everyone within seconds. The underground journey came a nightmare of near misses, with jutting rocks and cave-ins that had created deadly rapids. Twice they were forced to portage around impassable sections, carrying the raft and their meager supplies through passages barely wider than a man's shoulders. "There are," Maria shouted, pointing ahead where a faint gleam suggested daylight. An opening. But as they approached what seemed like deliverance, Nate's heart sank. The cave mouth was blocked by iron bars, old mining equipment, rusted but still solid. They were trapped in a watery tomb. "Stand back," Pavel commanded, producing a stick of dynamite from his prospecting gear. "I saved this for emergency. This qualifies, yes." The explosion in the confined space was deafening, sending shockwaves through the water and showering them with rock fragments. But when the smoke cleared, a gap had been blown in the barrier, just wide enough for their raft. They emerged into blazing afternoon sunlight that stabbed their calf-adjusted eyes like knives. The river had carried them to a hidden valley surrounded by towering red rock formations, a place that looked untouched by human civilization. "Paradise," whispered one of the children, staring in wonder at the green oasis fed by the underground spring. But their moment of relief was shattered by a familiar voice echoing off the valley walls. Well, the rats finally emerged from their hole." Joaquin Vasquez, the cartel's most feared enforcer, sat astride a magnificent black stallion at the valley's only exit, flanked by a dozen armed men. His scarred face wore the cruel smile of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "Did you really think you could escape us in our own territory?" Vasquez called out, his Mexican accent thick with mockery. "We know every cave, every river, every hiding place from here to the border." Nate's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but he was outnumbered and caught in the open with innocent people to protect. Beside him, Maria's face had gone pale at the sight of Vasquez. Clearly she knew the man's reputation. "I remember you, Senorita," Vasquez continued, his voice turning silky with menace. "Your father begged very prettily before we killed him. I wonder if you'll beg as beautifully." Maria's spine straightened with magnificent defiance. "I am not my father, and I do not beg." Vasquez's laugh was like broken glass. "We shall see. Pecuega shall see." "Let the others go, Vasquez," Nate called out, his hand steady on his Colt despite impossible odds. "Your business is with me and Maria." The cartel enforcer's scarred face twisted with amusement. "Ah, but you are wrong, Vaquero. My business is with anyone who defies the cartel's will. These people have seen too much, know too much." Maria stepped forward, her chin raised in regal defiance. "Then let us settle this with honor. Single combat your champion against ours. Winner takes all." Vasquez stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Interesting proposal. But who would stand as your champion, Pecuega?" "This broken-down cowboy." "This broken-down cowboy," Nate said quietly. "Who's going to put you in the ground?" The valley fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through the ancient rocks.
"I both."
Sides understood what was being proposed, a death match with 13 lives hanging in the balance. "Very well," Vasquez decided, his gold teeth glinting. "But we do this proper, Alejandro?" He gestured to a mountain of a man who dismounted with the fluid grace of a professional killer. "Show them what happens to those who cross the crimson." Cartel. Alejandro was built like a grizzly bear, all muscle and scars, with hands that looked capable of crushing a man's skull. A machete hung at his side, its blade dark with old stains, as the two champions faced each other in the valleys. Center Maria caught Nate's arm. "You don't have to do this," she whispered urgently. "We could fight our way out and watch children die in the crossfire." Nate shook his head. "This is the only way, Maria. Win or lose, at least the innocent ones have a chance."
She pulled
him close, kissing him with desperate passion. "Then win," she breathed against his lips. "Win because I love you, because I can't imagine a world without you in it." The words hit harder than any physical blow. "I love you too," he said roughly. More than my own life. And live for me, Maria commanded. Live for us. The duel began with Alejandro's roar of challenge as he charged with his machete raised. Nate sidestepped at the last instant, at his knife flashing in a silver arc that opened a line across the giant's ribs. What followed was a dance of death. Played out on the valley floor, Alejandro fought like a berserker, all power and fury, while Nate relied on speed and precision learned during his years with the Apache. Blood stained the desert sand as both men traded wounds. The tide turned when Alejandro overextended himself. In a killing blow, Nate dropped under the swing, came up inside the giant's guard, and drove his blade home with surgical precision. Alejandro dropped like a felled tree, his machete clattering away across the rocks. Vasquez's face contorted. With rage, kill them all. He screamed to his men, but before the cartel gunmen could raise their weapons, war cries echoed from the valley's rim as Chief Ayana and his warriors appeared like avenging spirits. The Apache had followed the underground river, tracking their friends to this final confrontation. The battle was brief but decisive. Caught between Nate's deadly accuracy and Apache fury, half of Vasquez's men fell in the opening volley. The rest threw down their weapons in surrender. Vasquez himself tried to flee, but Maria's thrown knife took him in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Nate crawled through the dust, his arrogance finally broken. Please, he gasped as Nate stood over him. Mercy ... The same mercy you showed Maria's family? Nate asked coldly. Wait, Maria said, placing her hand on Nate's arm. Let him live. Let him carry word back to the cartel that Maria Esperanza and Nate Valderon are not to be trifled with. 3 months. Later, in a small church in Haven's Rest, Maria walked down the aisle in a simple white dress toward the man who had risked everything to save her. Their love had been forged in fire and tested by blood, emerging stronger than steel as they kissed to seal their vows. The freed captives cheered, and even Chief Ayana smiled. Sometimes in a world full of darkness, love really could triumph there. Wild Frontier Tale had found its perfect ending, not in vengeance but in hope.